Speaking of wonderful alum, we're now going to have the opportunity to hear from an extraordinary and distinguished alumni of the Fletcher School, Charles Dallara. I've known Charles for 6 or 7 years. I've known of him for much longer than that. He's currently, as I mentioned, the Executive Vice President of Partners Group, which is a global investment firm. But I think more to our purposes today, he spent about a decade leading the Institute of International Finance, which is effectively the umbrella organization for the global banking system. In that role, Charles was a leading voice, a leading actor in what turned out to be the first significant project to save the euro as we faced real challenges with Greece several years ago. Today, that continues. Henry Kissinger said to me once that in the world of international relations, every solution is merely the key to the next problem. That's probably correct. Charles, in addition to his work at the International Institute of Finance, was also for many years in the U.S. Department of the Treasury, where he served brilliantly in both the Reagan and the first Bush administration as the Secretary of the Treasury for International Affairs. Obviously a crucial job, and if I may say it, a very Fletcher job, a place where geopolitics, money, government come together in one of the institutions of the U.S. government. He serves on a variety of boards of directors around the world today. He continues to be very engaged in the world of finance, particularly in the world of international business. He is, we're very proud to say, a Fletcher Mald and a Fletcher PhD. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that he began this long career of extraordinary service as a junior officer in the United States Navy. So he's the whole package as far as I'm concerned. Let's welcome him to the podium, Charles Dallara, Dr. Dallara.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jim, for those very kind words. It is a special pleasure to share this day with you, the class of 2015. Could I just for a moment invite the class of 2015 to stand for a moment? I have one clear message I would like to share with you at the outset, and then a few other thoughts. You're about to receive a degree from the best school of international affairs this world has ever seen. Congratulations to you. Please go ahead and take a seat. I'm so honored to be on the podium with this distinguished group. Do we have a great dean or what? This man has brought energy, leadership, vision to this school in just 2 years. I'm not ever surprised when he does that, but I continue to be impressed by it. I've had the pleasure of working with the chairman of our board for a number of years, a remarkable businessman. We've all been privileged to benefit from a special leader of the academic work here at the university, Ian Johnson, and to simply be on the podium with Dr. Pillay, a woman whose life stands as inspiration to us all, is a great honor for me. Thank you all for allowing me to share the podium with you. I would like to take just 30 seconds to recognize one other important member of the Fletcher community who probably doesn't get the recognition he deserves. I think his title's not too relevant, but his title is Executive Associate Dean. I just learned yesterday that Jerry Sheehan has been part of this school for 30 years. Jerry, thank you for everything that you do for Fletcher. You know, I gave a speech last year to my company, and I said that the most favorite word to me, the most favorite 9-letter word in the English language to me, and I actually learned a good bit about this when I was a naval officer, is the word adversity, because it is so key to growth, to development, to realizing who you are. In order to prove the point, I fractured my hand a week ago, but I'm still here with you. I'm delighted to be here today. This school is not just the best school of international affairs. It is to me, and I hope to every graduate here today, I hope to every family member, every alumnus, every member of the faculty, it is a magical place. I realize, of course, that the name may seem to a few of the graduates today a bit anachronistic. The Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Some of you may be here, like I was, concentrating your studies on economics, finance, or business. And perhaps law or diplomacy may only be a secondary or tertiary focus. But as someone who has been able, over 4 decades, to accomplish just a few things in the world of global finance, I would say to you, don't shy away from this unusual moniker. Whether you are receiving a Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy, a Master of International Business, or a PhD, you will find those people who scratch their heads and ask you, what is the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy? When I left Fletcher in 1976 with 2 degrees in hand, I thought I had accomplished something. I applied for positions like many of you are doing now, and I went through an interview process at the International Monetary Fund, a place that some of you may aspire to work. I made it through the first 2 rounds, and then in the 3rd round, a fairly senior and I thought rather self-important human resource officer said to me, well, Mr. Dallara, you seem to know your economics. You did very well on the tests that we gave you, but I still can't quite figure out this degree that you have, Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy. Can you explain it to me? And so I pointed out that the former deputy managing director of the IMF, Bill Dale, was actually a Fletcher grad. That didn't seem to impress him because Bill was retired. So I then went on to explain that I had a deep understanding of international economics, but I had also decided that I needed to learn a few other things about the world before I could grapple with the problems of the real world. And I mentioned the other areas I had studied here: international law, diplomacy, political science, development. And he still wasn't terribly impressed, and I got a letter a week or 2 later saying that, thank you for your interest, but we don't have an opening for you. Well, I went to work for the Treasury Department. 8 years later, President Reagan nominated me to be the U.S. director, the executive director on the board of the International Monetary Fund. I found myself holding the most important seat on the board of the IMF. Soon after I had settled in, I was approved by the Senate. 2 or 3 weeks later, I got a request from an HR officer to come call on me. Sure enough, it was the man who had turned me down for my job. He had only one question for me. Mr. Dallara, are you going to fire me? I assured him that I would not even sure I had the authority. It was tempting for just a moment. It was tempting, but I did encourage him to revise his entrance procedures for applicants to the International Monetary Fund. Just a little story to share with you for those of you who may want to aspire to work in fields of finance. The magic, of course, of the Fletcher School started for me 4 years before I arrived. I was a senior at the University of South Carolina, about to launch what turned out to be 4 wonderful years as a naval officer, just a drop in the bucket compared to the impressive 37 years that this gentleman served our country. But I found a brochure. I was in the president's office considering whether I should give a speech on commencement day in my naval uniform. This was spring of 1970. Does anyone remember here? Now, I know I'm talking to some youngsters, but does anyone remember here what happened in early May of 1970 on a U.S. campus? Kent State. 4 students were shot and killed, a tragic incident which highlighted the tension in our country at the time. So here I was, I'd been invited to give a speech on commencement day in my midshipman uniform. And I was discussing with the president whether it was wise to go through with it. We decided in the end to do it. I welcomed the protests that occurred that day. They went on for 20 minutes before I could speak. But something unusual happened as I was in the president's office. As I was leaving his office that day, considering the rather heavy weight that lay on the university at that time, I saw a blue brochure lying on his table, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. I picked it up and glanced through it. I noticed it had fascinating courses, not just in international economics and finance, but in international law, in diplomacy, in law of the sea, in the environment, in development economics, in Middle Eastern studies, in energy studies. And I thought to myself, can one actually get a graduate degree studying such a fascinating and diverse set of topics? I put it down, but it never left my mind. 4 years later, as I was finishing my naval career, I came and applied to the Fletcher School. And lo and behold, I met a dean of admissions who happened to be a former naval officer, Dean Chuck Shane. Marvelous man. I don't know how many of you here may have known him, but he was part of that generation that carried the Fletcher School into its second and third phase with Dean Gullion, whose very impressive picture hangs in the library there, guiding the school. What I found to be magical, and I have already talked to a few students here who have found the same thing, is this special combination of remarkable, highly talented professors who are able to share their wisdom in their own special way. I'm delighted to see that a few of them that were here during my day in 75 and 76. And yes, I did come back 10 years later after a painful period of writing my dissertation, but my true time here on campus was 75 and 76, and I'm delighted to see that Alan Hendrickson, Walt Falsgraf, and others continue to dispense their version of Fletcher wisdom day out and day around this school. Thank you very much. Others that left such an imprint on me have moved on to other universities and other activities. A very flamboyant and brilliant political scientist, Arpad von Lazar, an outstanding international economist, whom our dean also studied under, Jerry Cohen. His 1969 publications, Balance of Payments Policy, still stands as the mini Bible for understanding the balance of payments between countries in the world. By the way, I tried to find a copy in the library yesterday, and there isn't one, so I have only one small request that maybe the librarian can track one down. Others, sadly, have passed away, but they have left my imprint on you, just as in generations to come, the faculty here will leave their imprint on you. John P. Roach, you may not remember the name. A quote from John: "In politics, a straight line is the shortest distance to disaster." He wrote a book, Shadow and Substance. Track down a copy of it, a marvelous book that helped me at the time understand American politics. Rob West, Leo Gross, others that left such a remarkable imprint, who are sadly no longer with us. What, of course, defines the unique magic that we have here in Fletcher is not just the faculty. It is also the remarkably diverse energetic, committed, and inspiring student body. I stand in awe of every one of you because you are today's vision of the future, and thank you for being part of the Fletcher School. I never met a Fletcher student then, and I haven't since then, who defines herself or himself precisely by their own nationality, their own language, their own experience, their own perspectives. When I found here that unique combination of global talent, in my day at Fletcher, we didn't need social media to be interconnected. We became interconnected, and it has continued throughout our lives. The same will happen for you. I am confident of that, because you will not only receive tomorrow a special degree, you'll receive something even more important. You'll receive a prism through which to understand, to analyze, and to help solve the problems of the world. That prism is unique to Fletcher. There are many graduation ceremonies around Boston this weekend, many degrees being dispensed. No one else will receive the Fletcher prism, through which you will be able to view the world with special clarity. This unique opportunity here to study, I know it seems maybe so commonplace to you now, but believe you me, it will never seem commonplace once you move away from here. This unique opportunity to study in this highly charged, intellectually challenging, multidisciplinary environment is so powerful to your potential capacity to contribute to the world's solutions of the world's problems. Soon after I arrived at the Treasury Department, and I realized I was competing for advancement with master's and PhD economists from some of the best schools in the country, some of which are neighboring here. I won't mention their names. Some of which are on the West Coast, one of which is in a cold northwestern city. Something odd happened, and I don't think it was just a function of me. Over the course of my first year, I was somehow able to help my bosses find pragmatic solutions to complex problems. Within 2 months, I was sent to Mexico to gingerly support from the side complicated negotiations between the Mexican government and the International Monetary Fund on how to handle their growing debt problem. This was not, I thought, purely an economic or financial challenge. You had to understand this was the day when Mexico was a democracy in name only, when it was an exceptionally closed economy, when the educational standards of Mexico remained very primitive. Without understanding some of those basic facts, I don't think I could have been terribly helpful. A few years later, I traveled on a flight with Paul Volcker, newly anointed chairman of the Federal Reserve, to Belgrade, Yugoslavia, to the IMF World Bank annual meetings of 1979. We stopped along the way in Hamburg, Germany, and we saw the Chancellor, Germany, we saw the head of the Bundesbank. And I sat through an embarrassing 2 hours while Paul Volcker was lectured by German officials on the growing inflation in the United States, which they, the German leadership, considered a threat to stability worldwide. You could not understand this if you did not have a bit of grasp of German history, of European history, of what the world had gone through in that painful decade of the 1930s. When it came time 3 days later to listen to a speech and to help Paul Volcker write a speech in Yugoslavia, he came up to me and abruptly said, "Go pack your bags, Dallara." I didn't know what was going on, but I did what I was told to do. I gathered my papers and my clothing quickly. I hurried to meet him on the airplane along with a few other key Treasury officials. And I said, "Where are we going, Paul?" And he said, "To kill inflation." And indeed, he did. He came back home. I share these stories with you not because of the minor steps that I have taken along the way in my career, because at each of those moments, I found the prism that I was granted here in Fletcher so helpful in my capacity to address the complex problems of the day. 4 years ago this weekend, I was attending a Fletcher board meeting right up in this wonderful library. I guess you now call it the Harry Potter room. And I received a call from Jean-Claude Trichet. Jean-Claude at that time was the president of the European Central Bank. And he and I had been engaged in some delicate discussions about whether or not Greece's sovereign debt should be restructured. He had great reservations. And although I shared some of them, I was also increasingly convinced that without a restructuring of Greece's debt, that they would never have an opportunity to move back into an environment of growth. And hopefully someday, maybe not tomorrow, but hopefully someday renewed prosperity. I took the call in the board meeting, walked out, and stood over the tennis courts in that area where we have the nice stones for 15, 20, 30 minutes, discussing carefully, but with some precision, whether we could go forward. 2 moments stand out in my mind. The first one was him stopping me in the middle of the debate and saying, "Charles, what is that kerplunk, kerplunk, kerplunk I hear?" I said, "Those are Fletcher students playing tennis, Jean-Claude. It's a beautiful spring day here." But the second thing I remember so carefully was his precise indication to me that I still have some doubts, but you have my concurrence to speak to the leadership of the European governments about restructuring the sovereign debt. Subsequently, I dealt directly with Chancellor Merkel, President Sarkozy, and many others, but no conversation in that whole saga was more important than that conversation that perhaps with some serendipity took place outside the Fletcher Library. Let me close on a personal note, because not only has Fletcher armed me to approach the complex problems of the world, because, you know, they are not linear. They are not driven by one academic discipline. Those problems are so interwoven with layers of history, layers of culture, different dimensions of so many complex problems that I think only a Fletcher education can prepare one to tackle them. I would also say, though, that somewhat to my surprise, Fletcher prepared me to have the courage to approach a woman who had grown up in China, a totally different system, suffered under the horrible years of the 1970s while I was a student here. As a young girl, her family suffered under what we all know China went through in the 1970s. Years later, I had the pleasure to meet this woman who had a degree from Beijing University and had served for 3 years in the Foreign Service. Fortunately, whether it was my Fletcher background or not, she accepted my proposal, and Pijin has been my inspiration, my counsel, my support, my constant companion ever since then. And whatever I've achieved, Greece, global finance, whatever, over the years since then, is due in large part to her role in my life. Thank you, Pijin. Finally, let me close by coming back to my analogy of the prism. As I stand here today, I can say one thing with absolute confidence. and I speak now directly to the class of 2015. There will be no one in your generation better prepared to lead the world toward the middle of the 21st century with prosperity, with peace, with inclusiveness, and with justice than you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you. Wonderful. Charles, thank you so much. And the image of the prism, I think, is a powerful one. And as I look at this wonderful faculty here today, I can really see those beams of light that come together and reshape. And it reminds me how lucky we all are to have a faculty like this.